Let's take a look at some of the strongest orky army lists around, with a look at what units and detachments are being brought along by good players to win games and tournaments for the greenskins. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking orcs once more, and in this video I thought we'd do an overview of successful orc army lists and what people have been using to do well with the Codex so far. Initially following the Codex, the orcs seem to have been doing fairly well. It's fairly early days yet at the moment, but they fairly solidly seem to be one of the stronger armies in Warhammer 40k. Tournament win rates initially around about 54% or so, but really quite a lot of big tournament wins even just a few weeks since the points update came out, and are one of the most commonly played armies competitively along with Necrons. Basically on all the tournament stats, it looks like it's a very good time to be declaring your war. In terms of common themes out of army lists, it seems that bully boys are kind of unsurprisingly being the most popular and successful detachment so far. Just massive amount of raw strength, largely carried by very scary mega nobs, though they've got other things besides that as well. And maybe the next strongest after the bully boys might be the green tide, floating the midboard with loads of very hard to kill boys. Besides that, War Horde and Dread Mob already seem to have got a small event win as well. And between all that, it does seem that orcs can still be successful outside of bully boys, though not every detachment seems to be doing particularly well. Cult of Speed and the Big Hunt haven't really been seen much in tournaments so far. Cult of Speed I think is a bit hamstrung by the power of the buggy datasheets and things. The Big Hunt maybe just isn't necessarily even the strongest way to run a Beast Snagger themed army, unfortunately. Maybe just not very take all comers in it being quite dependent on certain targets being present in the enemy army. Otherwise, for common unit choices, there's some things that crop up in a lot of armies regardless of detachment. Gretchin are great cheap units for objectives and rustling up command points, Stormboyz are excellent for secondary objective games, and Trukks are just all around efficient transports that move fast and get greenskin melee where it needs to be. They tend to crop up in a load of lists. Otherwise, for more central damage threats, Mega Nobz, Boys and Warbosses are all pretty strong for the front line. And Ghazghkull Tracker seems to be pretty strong regardless of detachment as well. There's plenty more units than this that are maybe useful in a slightly more peripheral sort of role or a bit more detachment specific sort of things. Though unfortunately for the most part shooty orcs don't seem to be doing enormously well, at least in competition with the melee stuff, even big buffs like Dread Mob not really quite being able to get them there for the most part. In any case, let's take a quick look at 6 successful army lists and focus in on a couple of the unit choices that these good players have taken along with them on the path to victory. First up, let's start with the Bully Boys, a list that I mentioned previously on the channel. This list by Jeff Dew, who used it to take first at Loaded Dice May the 4th Open, a medium-sized tournament of 32 players. Bully Boys is the detachment that gives you 2 turns of war for everything that's Nobz, Mega Nobz and Warboss keyworded, and that's just spectacularly powerful for making units faster, tougher and stronger for a couple of battle rounds, absolutely devastating on rounds 2 and 3, and just gives you a lot of raw threat. On top of that, you've got an AP debuff stratagem against shooting that can make Mega Nobs fantastically tanky, even more so than they already are, plus a nice reroll hit rolls in melee option that's great on Nobs and Mega Nobs. Jeff's list has 3 units of 5 Mega Nobs with twin kill saws, looking like 2 of them are going to be transported in trucks, one with a Warboss with the big gob, and the other one is with a Warboss in Mega Armor with teleporter, giving their unit deep strike, potentially meaning that they're a scary rapid ingress threat if they need to be. Mega Nobs are just ridiculously hard to kill, and almost no matter what you throw them at, they're going to cause problems for the opponent. Besides that, in another 2 trucks, we've got 2 more Warbosses with Power Claws. They're each leading a unit of Nobs, 1 of 5 and 1 of 10, all with Power Claws there for yet more violence, if not quite as tough. They're still not trivial to take down though, given a -1 to wound and a 5+ invulnerable save for 2 turns. And then there's 1 big unit with a Warboss Painboy and 20 boys, a massive great big tanky unit that'll get 2 turns of 5+ invulnerable save and a feel no pain and resurrecting some models with the Painboy, a massive amount of OC and some pretty good infantry clearing that should be able to dominate a midfield objective for a turn or 2. Then there's 3 units of 11 Gretchin, hard to go wrong with 40 points for lots of OC and secondary objective potential. They can rustle up some command points. And then there's 2 units of 5 Stormboyz, commonly included fast movers. For small units deep striking for secondaries, or just a massive long movement threat range, they can potentially advance and charge if they need to skirmish with things, or just go really quickly to get to do secondary objectives and make sure that you're scoring victory points. Focusing on some Bully Boys core units, we've got the Mega Nobs first, 30 points each for great big tanky orcs, with 3 wounds at toughness 6 and a 2+ save. The Bully Boys list seem to be most commonly fielding them with twin kill saws for 2 attacks each at strength 12, AP 3, damage 2 and twin linked, so pretty likely to cause serious damage to whatever they touch. They're not quite as many volume attacks outside the war. Their big thing is they get a 4+ feel no pain inside the war, so if you basically have 3 units of these guys on turns 2 and 3 when they might be in the war, in the middle of the board, the opponent's guns just aren't going to make too much damage against them. High saves with potential cover, and that AP debuff stratagem should mean that a lot of firepower just goes away, never mind the feel no pain. Very, very scary, and they've got some good options to support them, Warbosses in Mega Armor or Ghazghkull himself. Otherwise, the regular Nobz are pretty efficient in close combat as well, 5 of them for 105 points for mass power claw attacks this time, 15 attacks at strength 9, or a big 20 attacks at strength 10, AP 2 and damage 2 in the war. They're pretty solid to go with a Warboss for a -1 to wound, and can also make great use of the powerful stratagems from Bully Boys. To get the scary units into battle, it's well worth mentioning the truck, 65 points for just a very efficient, cheap transport with a wrecking ball. 10 wounds at toughness 8 is good defense for this cost, plus the Grot Riggers can have it slowly revive some wounds over the course of the game if it gets damaged. Opponents are rarely going to want to have to shoot them if they've got other options out of your damage dealers out there, and if you've got some command points spare, then they can be surprisingly threatening in their own right. A wrecking ball plus tank shock means you've got a good chance for about 4 mortal wounds or so, potentially meaning that you can't really ignore the transports in terms of them killing things in melee. Next up, it looks like someone's managed to make a Dread Mob list work. This list was run by a Martin Hultgren, who used it to take first at Lincoln, an event in Sweden I believe, where he managed to take this to 4 wins and 1 draw. Dread Mob certainly looked like one of the more fun and exciting detachments out of Codex Orks. It definitely hands out some meaningful damage boosts, but it just looks like the overall value hasn't been quite enough to push the units that it has to use to do particularly well. In terms of tournament performance, for most it seems to be doing it a fair bit worse than Bully Boys and Green Tide. It's pretty cool to see someone win an event with it, though it seems that perhaps the unit that most people were initially fixating on to maybe be a central unit for this detachment were Killer Cans, but it seems that there's literally none of the things here. Perhaps one of the more obvious themes in this particular army are 3 big mechs with shock attack guns, one with the Git Finder goggles, all leading squads of looters, squads of 10 of them with custom Mega Blasters on the Spanner Boys. Looters use the detachment buffs kind of fantastically well. Getting those sustained or lethal hits on 6s is really quite big when you're only hitting on either 5s or 6s normally anyway, and potentially getting full rerolls against your target if you can shoot against something or an objective, meaning that you get more of those criticals. They're pretty nice with the bigger shell stratagem as well for a whole bunch of damage 3 shots, and certainly like the Git Finder goggles ignoring cover. Otherwise, it looks like there's only really 2 other units that are trying to make use of the detachment's main rules. A big Gorkanaut, which will be good for focal stratagems for buffing that Deathstorm Mega Shooter. It gets to hit on 4s with a mech nearby, and then it can make good use of all of the stratagems and things that it needs to be putting out a fairly serious amount of fire, and it's a pretty massive threat in close combat as well, both with its core profile and tank shock. There's then 3 mech guns, which are armed with spasher guns, a nice general purpose anti-elite battery to have in your deployment zone I guess, even if they're not going to be very mobile. And then most of the rest is maybe slightly more general purpose orc supporting units. There's a Warboss in Mega Armor leading 5 Mega Nobz with twin kill saws. It looks like they'd be jumping out of either a battle wagon or a truck. Interesting to see that even in this detachment it wasn't enough to tempt into taking the big mech. There's 2 units of flash kits which are kind of interesting, some shooty orcs up close, and they can still put out a bit of damage and melee with their choppers as well. Definitely not on the same sort of level of scariness without Captain Badrug, but at least they got a bit cheaper I suppose. Then there's a big 44 Gretchin plus Ronthurds, 1 big unit of 22 that takes Zogrod Wartsnagger, and then 2 smaller units of 11. The big unit could be a bit of a nuisance in this detachment, given that you can get a stratagem for reactive moves for Gretchin, so it seems like that could be quite disruptive, trying to take them down on midfield objectives where they could put a whole load of good OC there. And then to make up the rest of the list, we've got 1 unit of 5 Stormboyz, 2 trucks, where I guess one would be for the Mega Nobz, not sure what the other one is for, whether it's looters or flash kits, and then 1 big orky battle wagon with a kill cannon, which could be a kind of interesting shooty unit in itself. I guess in theory you could have looters inside it firing out with a +1 to hit for the mech maybe. They'd not be able to use the detachment buffs for that, so it might be a bit more questionable. Still really quite a cool list though, good to see that big mechs and looters can actually do some good work and make good use of the Dread Mob rules, even if there's perhaps a little bit disappointingly few walkers in this list. Focusing on a couple of those units, the looters do feel kind of stand out here, just 50 points per 5, so not really all that much more expensive than your basic boys. Slightly weird Horde firepower, that does mean that you can be losing some good shooting with just a bit of chip damage unfortunately, but they can spell out quite a lot of strength 8 and damage 2 shots at 24 inches, get those rerolls against things on objectives, and get the heavy keywords to hit better when stationary. Pretty nice for the dread mob buffs, even if they might be taking some hazardous checks. Otherwise, the Gorkanaut Deathstorm Mega Shooter could certainly be a massively scary shooting threat in this detachment. It could be very general purpose with things like bigger shells with bigger gits going on, plus lethal hits, and does have a fair amount of rocket shots to back that up as well. When it gets into close combat, it's got a bunch of strength 18 and damage 6 attacks, which could be pretty good for tank shock as well, and the melee gets +1 to hit in the war. If you just want to chew through enemy infantry as well, you could potentially have full hit rerolls for 1 CP by using Daka. In this army, you'd often be hitting on a 4+ anyway, due to that mech being nearby. Overall, pretty cool to see Dread Mob do well. Next up, we've got a War Horde list, this one run by Dylan Hopkins, who used it to take first at Collector's Market GT, a small grand tournament of 26 players, and he went 5-0 undefeated. The index-style War Horde still feels like a very powerful and general-purpose detachment for the Orks. I think it's perhaps understandable that people are a bit more focused on bully boys, given how obscene Mega Nobz are at the moment, but if they were toned down a bit, I feel like this would break through really quite a lot more, though it still seems to be tournament topping good, as you can see here. This list is interesting as it's almost going for a half green tide with Warbosses, Painboys and Boys squads, but given that it's not going for a 420 boys on the table or anything like that, it seems that Warhorde was more efficient versus the actual green tide detachment. The core of the list is 3 squads of 20 boys, all with choppers and a power claw. All 3 are led by Warbosses with power claws, one of them with follow me lads. 2 of the units also get Painboys for the feel no pain and making them really quite good against damage 1 attacks, and one of them also gets a Weirdboy for teleporting around the board, quite nice when you've got a +2 to charge stratagem as an option, means that you should have a very good chance of making a charge after their jump goes off. Then we've got a big and threatening unit of Ghazghkull Thracker with 6 Mega Nobz with kill saws, still very efficient even outside of bully boys, and they can just foot slog up onto a central objective and be utterly terrifying. Ghazghkull's data sheet certainly got improvements as well as the Mega Nobz, and it definitely gives you a big central threat that the opponent's going to need to back away with unless they want their biggest and nastiest units mauled by 400 points or so of orky armoured violence. Otherwise, beyond that, there's 2 kill rigs, which can be quite nice with Overwatch with their Whir towers. One of them looks like they're transporting 10 Beast Stagger boys into battle, though the other one seems to be empty. Kind of interesting to see that. I guess they're not too bad melee threats in their own right with the sustained hits, and do put out a bit of more accurate firepower than Orks might normally get. And then there's some standard objective support in 2 units of 11 Gretchin and 2 units of 5 Stormboyz. Overall, a pretty interesting list there. Ghazghkull and some elites, some hard as nails boys mobs, and backed up by 2 big Beast Snagger creations. The big boss Ghazghkull himself has been making an appearance in really quite a lot of these lists, and seems to be really quite playable regardless of detachment. 235 points does bring you a lot of greenskin violence, a whole load of attacks at strength 14, damage 4, and now having his more general purpose sweep mode with 12 attacks at strength 8, damage 2. He takes his Mega Nobz unit to the next level, giving you full rerolls to hit and wound, which is kind of mad, plus even better boost in the war with better critical hits, extra good in the War Horde there I guess, plus Makari being annoying and tanking surprisingly dangerous enemy shots on that 2+ invulnerable save, plus giving out lethal hits in the war himself. Nice to see the big boss doing well like this. Otherwise, at this point, it's probably worth highlighting the Stormboyz and the Gretchin datasheets, which are present in the majority of Ork Army lists. Stormboyz are 65 points per 5, basically the profile of a standard boy, but faster and with deep strike. You get a power claw in each unit. These are just seen as the go-to units to jump around the board doing secondary objectives, potentially deep striking for things like behind enemy lines or various other secondaries, and then having good movement to get where they need to go to do further actions and things after that. Their full throttle rule got better in the Codex as well, which certainly doesn't hurt. They can advance and charge and potentially skirmish with enemy infantry really quite a long way away, even if they're not in the war. And being able to fall back and charge too doesn't hurt either. Having an average charge threat range of around about 23 inches is really quite powerful. It's hard for your opponents to become really safe from these. Otherwise, Gretchin are basically also kind of auto-include in most army lists. 40 points for 11 of them already makes them very interesting just as a cheap unit for doing secondary objectives or camping primaries for low amounts of cost. and they do that spectacularly well for just 40 points, having a whole load of wounds to soak through, even if they will die to basically any weapon. They'll often just have more models than the enemy has shots. I feel like they'd probably see at least some play, even if it was just that, but they also generate you command points as well, having a coin flip chance to farm one if they're on an objective. Pretty handy for most of the detachments there. Seems that most army lists include at least 2 units, some decide to go for even more. Next up, let's look at a Green Tide army. This one's a list by a Donald Plummer who used it to take second at Carnage at the Keep May Mayhem, going 4-on-1 against a field of 25 players. Green Tide is the army that gives you a 5+ invulnerable save for all of your boys, plus re-rolling saving throws of 1 while there's 10 or more models in the squad, then a whole bunch of stratagems for supporting getting your hordes into melee and doing well there. There's one for regenerating boys, one for longer charges, and one for a nice re-roll wound rolls, giving your opponent some tricky decisions as to whether or not they move their units forward to try and fight you for the early game points, but then risk some actually serious melee damage from sheer amount of chopper attacks and saves. This list starts, as most Green Tides do, with 6 units of 20 boys with choppers, a Nob with a Power Claw, and this list opts to take a couple of rockets per unit as well, which I think often are worth it on balance, giving up a couple of AP1 attacks for the odd chance to randomly splat a couple of Space Marines across the board. This list goes a little bit lighter on the characters than some for supporting those boys mobs. There's just 2 regular war bosses with power claws, one with ferocious show off for a little bit more personal melee damage, and one squad which I guess will be one of the war boss ones also has a Weirdboy with bloodthirsty belligerence. That's the one that allows you to re-roll charges. That's really quite handy out of Deep Strike, particularly in combination with a 1 command point stratagem to boost your charge rolls. Between them and the boys, you've just got a whole load of objective control to very tough bodies to swamp the midfield and hopefully score a lot of points and gain an insurmountable lead. Then we've also got Boss Snickrot, 2 units of Stormboyz and 2 units of Gretchin for doing objective type things. Boss Snickrot basically being like an orky Calidus assassin, lone operative things and jumping around the board. And then there's the interesting combo of a Warboss in Mega Armor plus 5 Mega Nobs with kill saws in a truck. Raucous Warcaller is the one that counts your models as 10 or more models in the unit, giving the Mega Nobs access to the reroll ones to save, which does mean that they could in theory have a 2+ rerollable save against things without much AP, which is kind of crazy. Finally, there's a Battle Wagon with a cannon and art case, plus all the standard upgrades beyond that. That means that you could take one of those big boys mobs and put it in the midfield with a fairly safe charge out of a very armoured transport vehicle. Overall, certainly looks pretty terrifying. A whole load of terrifying stat check things with all those boys across the board, plus some melee threat that you can't really ignore in the Mega Nobs that are fantastically tanky in their own way. Boys are just a pretty strong data sheet for the Orks in general, though obviously very central to the Green Tide. They're 85 points per 10 and get you a bunch of toughness 5, 5+ saves on the board, an invulnerable save in the Green Tide as well. They'll be able to scratch wounds off most things in the game with just mass chopper attacks, plus a power claw for a bit more punch, and maybe some grenades to throw around if they really need to put a bit more hurt on most armoured targets. They've got objective control too, which is great for primaries, plus they get the nice get the good bit special rule, which allows you to get these sticky objectives, which can be really quite powerful, particularly in a board control army like this. Potentially means that you can do some other interesting things like take an objective and then move on to charge the next thing with a mob, which might work out as the best way to do things rather than having to have a big horde unit sat around. They've got really quite good support in the Green Tide. Warboss is often seen leading them, and at 65 points they are one of the best data sheets in Codex Orks. A bunch of Power Claw attacks at Strength 10, AP 2 and Damage 2, plus getting you +1 to hit for your units. These guys are just generally efficient characters and add a lot to the threat, and then just go entirely next level in the war, given that you get an extra +4 to your attacks characteristic, so a massive 9 attacks normally at strength 11 with the Power Claw, a huge difference in Green Tide, and they get to be a bit next level in Bully Boys as well, as they can have that boosted fighting twice. Here's another take on the Green Tide, this one by Jacob Black, who used it to place second at Ragnarok Spring Tournament 2024, another small grand tournament of 22 players. This one goes a bit the other way in terms of character support. There's those 6 units of 20 boys this time round, with just 2 squads taking rockets, and this list goes very heavy on the characters. 3 war bosses, one with ferocious show off and one with raucous warcaller, 3 painboys giving the 5+ feel no pain, and the Weirdboy with bloodthirsty belligerence again. In this one, Ghazghkull's back as well, with a couple of Mega Nobs, and he could potentially make the boys a lot more vicious in combat nearby, giving them an aura of lethal hits in the war with Makari. And then as per normal, some Gretchin and Stormboyz to support, and no transports this time. Weirdboys and Painboys are the other staple support characters for Green Tide. Weirdboys are really nice for their dad jump, a 2+ chance to basically teleport your boys across the board. Very nice for a slower Horde army, but just pretty good in general. He also comes with a little bit of melee and a slightly random sniper attack. Certainly by no means guarantees to take out characters, but if you roll lucky, every so often it just will casually just destroy a Space Marine hero or something straight out of a unit. The jump can be pretty great in both Green Tide and Warhorde. Both of those have stratagems and other ways to make you charge more reliably at a reserve. If you just have a big unit of 20 boys turn up on a midfield objective perhaps, and then charge whatever enemy units are on the front line, pinning them all back. Warhorde has the +2 to charge stratagem, and Green Tide has the +1 to charge per battle round, so could have +2 turn 2 or +3 turn 3, and can get to reroll charges as mentioned with bloodthirsty belligerents. Otherwise, Painboys are a massive staple in Green Tide, and good in 20-man boy squads in general. A 5+ feel no pain makes the Orks just far more durable against damage 1 attacks, which the 5+ invulnerable of Green Tide doesn't help them with as much. And beyond that, they've got the option to revive models once per game, plus an extra power claw, which certainly helps, particularly in a unit with a Warboss for +1 to hit. Then an actually fairly terrifying Urti Syringe attack, where you have the chance to get D6 automatic mortal wounds on the enemy if you can make a wound roll of a 4+. That can be pretty terrifying against things like enemy Terminators. With the 5+ invulnerable, maybe re-rolling saves of 1, perhaps getting cover, and having a Painboy with a 5+ feel no pain. A big squad of boys can be very hard for certain armies to destroy in one round of shooting, even if they focus them, and that's pretty powerful for Green Tide taking those objectives. The Painboy might certainly have to fear precision a little bit though. If the enemy does manage to epic challenge or shoot him out of the unit, then he is perhaps a surprisingly easy target to take out at only 3 wounds himself. Finally, last but not least, we have another Bully Boys list, this one by Tom Green, who used it to take first at South Coast 40k Mage ET, 5 wins and no losses at a 26-player small grand tournament. As with the last one, this one's all about the Nobz, Mega Nobz and Warbosses getting double turns worth of war. We've still got the exact same setup of Mega Nobz with 3 units of 5 of them with twin kill saws. Though in this one we've interestingly got one more character than can lead the Mega Nobz. We've got Ghazghkull, 2 Warbosses in Mega Armor, and a big mech in Mega Armor. I'm not sure who's going to be running solo out of that lot. I guess it's not impossible, you could even just flex it depending on the game, as to which leader choice might be the most useful against your opponent and have one run solo. Otherwise we've got one big unit of 10 Nobz, presumably taking up another truck with a Warboss with Power Claw, some Stormboyz and Gretchin to score, and really quite a big focus on trucks this time as there's a big 5 of them. Interesting to see some Warbikers in here as well, fairly cheap and fairly tough fast outriders that could also be good skirmish units alongside the Stormboyz perhaps, and then finally a couple of units of boys as well. I guess one of them at least will be used to put sticky objectives in the home objective, and then maybe have them push out to the midfield for some higher objective control support there. Looks like at least one of those squads will be riding in a truck as well. Nice to see a different take on Bully Boys there, this one very heavy on the trucks, and managing to fit in Ghazghkull, the big boss himself. Overall, quite a lot of success for a whole bunch of Orky army lists over the past few weeks or so. Let me know your thoughts on the army down in the comments below, and always interested to hear any other insights as to the army lists, and if there's anything cool about them and how they're played that I might have missed in a quick look over them. Certainly seems that Ork lists are pretty convergent around a few units, but nice to see at least 4 of the detachments actually doing really quite well in tournaments so far, and just in general the faction being pretty strong and pretty destructive. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep all of these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.